The transport ship moved slowly through the lights of the Orion trade station. Hundreds of ships from many worlds were waiting outside the station for the coming peace meeting. Inside one private cabin sat Ambassador Lyris of the Valoran Union. She was one of the youngest diplomats ever sent by her people. This mission could decide the future of trade between seven-star nations. Failure was not an option. Lyris looked at the report on her tablet with tired eyes. Pirates had attacked trade routes for months and every government wanted answers. Because of the danger, the station had ordered extra security for all diplomats. Lyris expected trained station guards or maybe soldiers from one of the major powers. She did not expect what she saw when the cabin door opened. A tall human stepped inside and stood near the entrance without saying a word. He wore a dark security uniform with no medals and almost no markings. His face was calm and difficult to read. The human gave a short nod before speaking. "Officer Ethan Cole, assigned as your personal security guard during the conference." His voice was quiet but firm. Lyris studied him for a moment. Humans were new members of the Galactic Alliance. Most people knew very little about them. They traded metal, machines, and medicine, but rarely spoke about their own world. To Lyris, the human looked ordinary. 2 arms, 2 legs, and no sharp claws or armor plates. She wondered why the station had sent only 1 guard. "You will work alone?" she asked with surprise in her voice. Ethan simply nodded once. "1 is enough," he replied. The answer sounded strange to her ears. Many species use teams of guards for important leaders. 1 guard seemed far too little for a meeting this important. Still, Ethan looked completely confident. The transport reached the station docks a few minutes later. As Lyris walked through the arrival hall, she noticed something unusual. Several security officers looked toward Ethan and quickly moved aside. One large reptilian soldier even lowered his head slightly as the human passed by. Ethan acted as if nothing had happened. Lyris finally stopped walking and looked back at him. "Do they know you?" she asked. Ethan thought for a second before answering. "Some of them may know my service record." That answer only created more questions in her mind. Before she could ask more, another diplomat entered the hall surrounded by 6 armed guards. The diplomat was Ambassador Revik from the Saran Empire. Revik noticed Ethan immediately. His eyes grew wider for a brief moment before he quickly looked away. Lyris saw the reaction clearly. Revik was known for his pride and confidence, yet he suddenly looked uncomfortable. It was the first time she had ever seen fear on his face. The meeting chambers were already filling with representatives from across the galaxy. Voices echoed through the large room as diplomats prepared for negotiations. Lyris took her seat near the center table, while Ethan stood silently behind her chair. He remained perfectly still, watching every entrance and every movement around the room. 2 diplomats sitting nearby began whispering quietly to each other. Lyris could not hear every word, but one sentence reached her ears clearly. "Why would they send a human for this mission?" one asked. The other answered in a nervous voice. "Not just a human. Look at his shoulder patch carefully." Lyris turned slightly and looked toward Ethan's uniform. Near his shoulder was a small symbol of a blue planet surrounded by stars. She had seen the symbol before in galactic records. It was the mark of Earth. She did not understand why such a simple patch could make experienced diplomats nervous. A few minutes later, an elderly officer from station security approached her table. His feathers shook slightly as he spoke. "Ambassador Lyris, your security arrangements are impressive." Lyris smiled politely. "Thank you, but he was assigned by the station, not by me." The officer stared at Ethan for a moment before answering. "Then perhaps the station expects trouble," he said quietly. Without another word, he walked away. Lyris watched him leave with confusion growing in her mind. Around the chamber, she noticed more eyes moving toward Ethan. Some looked curious. Others looked worried. None of them looked surprised. The lights inside the chamber suddenly became dim as the conference prepared to begin. The room slowly fell silent. At that moment, a diplomat sitting across the table leaned toward his assistant and whispered words that Lyris would never forget. "She truly does not know," he said softly. She has no idea her bodyguard comes from one of the deadliest worlds in the galaxy. The conference officially began as the representatives took their seats around the great circular table. Above them, giant screens showed trade routes, border maps, and reports of pirate attacks. Ambassador Lyris focused on the discussion, but her attention kept returning to the human standing quietly behind her chair. Ethan never moved unless necessary. His eyes continued to scan the room with calm focus. As the meeting continued, Lyris noticed something strange happening around her. Whenever Ethan looked toward a door or hallway, nearby guards also turned to check the same direction. It was almost as if they trusted his instincts more than their own scanners. Even the station security chief glanced toward him several times. Ethan acted as though he never noticed. During a short break, Lyris walked toward the refreshment area with Ethan following behind her. Several diplomats stepped aside to make room for the human to pass. One insect-like merchant quickly lowered his antennae in respect. Another diplomat stopped speaking the moment Ethan entered the room. Lyris could no longer ignore the strange reactions. "You know many people here," she finally said while picking up a drink. Ethan looked at the crowd before answering. "Not personally." Lyris waited for more, but none came. The human always answered questions with as few words as possible. Somehow, his silence only made him more mysterious. Across the room stood Ambassador Revik from the Saran Empire. He was speaking with two military officers when he noticed Ethan nearby. The conversation stopped immediately. One officer quietly whispered something to Revik, and all three looked toward the human guard. A few seconds later, they left the room without another word. Lyris watched them disappear into the hallway. "Was it something you did?" she asked with curiosity. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No. Sometimes people fear what they do not understand." His answer surprised her. The human sounded less offended and more disappointed. Back inside the conference chamber, discussions became more tense. Reports showed that pirate attacks were increasing near important trade routes. Entire cargo ships had disappeared without a trace. Several governments accused each other of supporting the raiders in secret. Voices grew louder as tempers began to rise. Suddenly, one representative slammed his hand against the table. "If this continues, there will be war," he shouted. The room became silent for a moment. Many diplomats looked nervous, others looked angry. Through all of it, Ethan remained perfectly calm. Lyris noticed his eyes moving toward the main entrance. A second later, station guards rushed into position near every door. The ambassador looked around with confusion. "What is happening?" she asked quietly. Ethan did not answer immediately. "Someone important has arrived," he finally said. The doors opened slowly and a group of military officers entered the chamber. At their center walked Admiral Varrock of the Galactic Defense Fleet. The old commander was respected across known space. Entire wars had ended because of his decisions. Every diplomat in the room stood to greet him. As Admiral Varrock walked through the chamber, his eyes suddenly stopped on Ethan Cole. The old commander's expression changed immediately. Without hesitation, the famous admiral walked directly toward the human guard. The room watched in complete silence. To Lyris's surprise, Admiral Varrock gave a respectful nod toward Ethan. "It has been a long time, Commander Cole," the admiral said. Lyris stared at the human beside her. "Commander?" Ethan had introduced himself as a security officer. The human simply returned the nod. "Retired, Admiral," he answered calmly. The old commander gave a small smile. "Some titles never disappear," Varrock replied. Whispers quickly spread through the room. Diplomats began speaking quietly among themselves. Several looked shocked while others looked worried. Lyris could feel the tension growing with every second. She turned toward Ethan with questions filling her mind. "You were military?" she asked. "For a while," Ethan answered. That answer only created even more questions. Before Lyris could continue, the station alarm suddenly echoed through the chamber. Red emergency lights flashed across the walls and ceiling. Every conversation stopped instantly. Security officers reached for their weapons as warning messages appeared on the screens. Unknown ship detected, unauthorized docking in progress. Possible hostile action. Panic began spreading through the room. Several diplomats stood from their seats while guards rushed toward defensive positions. The conference that was supposed to bring peace was suddenly becoming a battlefield. Lyris looked toward Ethan. For the first time since meeting him, the human's expression changed. His calm eyes became cold and focused. He stepped forward and moved slightly in front of her chair. Then he spoke 4 simple words that made nearby guards fall silent. They came faster than expected. Red warning lights flashed across the conference chamber as the emergency alarm continued to sound. Diplomats quickly stood from their seats while security teams moved toward the entrances. Fear spread through the room in only a few seconds. Some representatives tried to contact their ships while others looked for exits. Through all the confusion, Ethan Cole remained perfectly calm. The human stepped closer to Ambassador Lyris and looked toward the main doors. His eyes moved across the room as if he was studying a battlefield map. Lyris noticed that he was not afraid. In fact, he looked almost prepared for this moment. That worried her more than the alarm itself. Station security officers rushed into the chamber with weapons ready. Their commander spoke loudly through a communication device. Unknown armed group has entered docking sector 7. All diplomats will remain inside until the threat is removed. The room became even quieter after hearing those words. Nobody liked the sound of armed intruders on a space station. Suddenly, the lights flickered for a second before returning. Ethan looked up at the ceiling immediately. "Power interruption," he said quietly. One nearby officer checked his scanner and looked surprised. "How did you know that?" he asked. Ethan simply pointed toward the lights above them. A loud explosion echoed somewhere deep inside the station. The floor shook beneath everyone's feet. Several diplomats screamed while others moved behind tables for cover. The station commander quickly ordered all exits sealed. Unfortunately, the security doors never closed. "They cut the power lines first," Ethan said calmly. The commander's eyes widened with shock. His scanner showed the same thing only seconds later. Someone had disabled the station's emergency systems before the attack even started. Whoever planned this operation knew exactly what they were doing. That thought sent a chill through the room. Then the chamber doors opened. 5 armored figures walked slowly into the room carrying advanced weapons. Their armor had no nation symbol or military markings. They moved with perfect discipline and confidence. One of them stepped forward and pointed his weapon toward the diplomats. "Nobody move," the leader ordered. Panic immediately spread through the chamber. Several guards raised their weapons, but the attackers had already taken control of the room. Their positions covered every entrance and exit. The diplomats were trapped. Ambassador Lyris could hear fear in the voices around her. The attacker looked around the chamber before speaking again. "We only want one person," he announced. His weapon slowly moved toward Admiral Varrock. The old commander remained calm, but everyone understood the danger. Without the Admiral, peace negotiations across the galaxy could collapse. Before anyone could react, Ethan stepped forward. He moved directly between the attackers and the diplomats. His expression remained cold and focused. The armed men immediately turned their weapons toward him. For a moment, the entire room became silent. The attacker's leader stared at Ethan carefully. "Human," he said quietly. Ethan said nothing. The attacker's voice suddenly changed. "Wait," he whispered. The man looked closer at the human's face and then at the Earth symbol on his shoulder. His hands tightened around his weapon. For the first time since entering the chamber, the attacker looked nervous. "No," he said softly. "It can't be him." The room watched in confusion as the attacker's confidence disappeared. Ethan took another step forward without showing any fear. Nearby security officers looked toward the human as if waiting for orders. Even Admiral Varrock remained silent. Finally, the attacker spoke words that made the room fall completely silent. "Commander Ethan Cole of Earth Expeditionary Command." The attacker's voice shook slightly. "The Ghost of Titan Station." Lyris slowly turned toward her bodyguard. For the first time since meeting him, she realized that the galaxy knew her quiet human guard far better than she did. The chamber remained silent after the attacker's words. Many diplomats looked at Ethan with shock and confusion. Ambassador Lyris turned toward her bodyguard and searched his face for answers. Ethan's expression did not change. He stood between the attackers and the diplomats as if protecting others was the most normal thing in the galaxy. The leader of the attackers lowered his weapon slightly. "You died at Titan Station," he said carefully. Ethan looked at him without emotion. "The reports were incorrect," he replied. A nervous whisper spread through the room. Even the station guard seemed surprised by the name Titan Station. Lyris looked toward Admiral Varrock for answers. The old commander slowly stepped forward. 5 years ago, pirates attacked Titan Station near human space, he explained. More than 300 civilians were trapped inside. The admiral paused for a moment before continuing. Commander Cole entered the station alone. The room became completely silent again. He fought for 17 hours without rest, Varrock continued. He evacuated the civilians one group at a time while holding back the attackers. Several diplomats stared at Ethan in disbelief. The human remained silent as if the story belonged to someone else. "The station exploded during the final evacuation," the admiral said quietly. "Everyone believed Commander Cole died with it." Lyris slowly looked back at her bodyguard. She remembered his calm voice and simple answers. Suddenly, those quiet moments felt very different. One of the attackers stepped backward nervously. "We were told no human military forces were present," he said to his leader. Another attacker looked toward Ethan's shoulder patch and tightened his grip on his weapon. Fear was slowly replacing confidence among the armed group. Lyris noticed the change immediately. These men had entered the chamber without fear. They had controlled diplomats, soldiers, and station security with ease. Yet one quiet human standing alone had changed everything. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. The attack leader quickly regained his confidence. "One human changes nothing," he shouted. "We still control the station." Ethan finally spoke after remaining silent for several minutes. "No," he answered calmly. "You controlled the station." The attacker frowned with confusion. Before he could ask another question, the lights changed from red to white. A new message appeared on every screen inside the chamber. Station security systems restored. Emergency response units activated. The attackers looked at each other with shock. Their leader checked his scanner and his face became pale. Someone had retaken control of the station network. Their escape routes were disappearing one by one. Panic slowly began spreading through their group. The attack leader pointed his weapon directly at Ethan. "You did this," he said angrily. Ethan gave a small nod. "When the lights flickered earlier, I accessed your network relay." Lyris stared at him in disbelief. He had repaired the station while everyone else was still panicking. The attacker took another step backward. "Who are you?" he demanded. Ethan looked directly into the man's eyes before answering. His voice remained calm and steady. "I am Ethan Cole of Earth. I come from a world where storms can destroy cities, oceans can swallow ships, and predators once hunted us for food." The human took one more step forward, and humanity survived all of it. For the first time that day, the attackers looked truly afraid, because they finally understood what the galaxy meant by one simple word: Deathworlder. The attackers stood frozen as the station lights returned to normal. Warning messages now appeared on their own scanners instead of the station screens. Security teams were moving through the station level by level. Their escape routes were disappearing quickly. For the first time since the attack began, the armed group looked trapped. The attack leader tried to hide his fear behind anger. He pointed his weapon toward Ethan and took a step forward. "You think one human can stop us?" he shouted across the chamber. Ethan remained calm and did not raise his voice. He simply looked at the man standing before him. "You already lost this battle," Ethan said quietly. The attacker laughed nervously and ordered his team to prepare for a fight. But before anyone moved, security officers surrounded the chamber from every entrance. Armed guards filled the hallways outside the room. Escape was no longer possible. The attackers slowly realized they had nowhere left to run. One by one, the weapons began to lower toward the floor. The attack leader looked around and saw only defeat waiting for him. His carefully planned operation had fallen apart in less than an hour. Not because of an army or a fleet, because of one quiet human standing in front of him. Finally, the attacker dropped his weapon onto the floor. The sound echoed through the silent chamber. His team followed a few seconds later. Security officers quickly moved forward to secure the prisoners. The danger that had threatened the conference was finally over. Ambassador Lyris looked toward Ethan with disbelief still visible on her face. Only a few hours earlier, she had wondered why the station assigned her a single human guard. Now she understood the answer. The station had not given her one guard. It had given her the safest place in the room. Admiral Varrock walked toward Ethan and offered a respectful nod. "The galaxy still owes you a debt, Commander Cole," he said. Ethan shook his head slightly. "I was doing my job then," he replied, "and I am doing my job now." The old admiral smiled at the answer. Around the chamber, diplomats from dozens of worlds watched the human with new respect. Some had feared humans, others had underestimated them. Now all of them understood the same truth. Humans did not survive because they were the strongest. Humans survived because they refused to quit. Later that day, the peace conference finally continued. Trade agreements were signed and new alliances were formed. For the first time in months, hope returned to the station. The crisis that could have started a war had ended peacefully. As the meeting came to a close, Ambassador Lyris stood before the gathered delegates. She looked around the chamber before speaking. Her voice was calm but clear enough for everyone to hear. "When I arrived here, I believed humans were simply another young species among many others," she said. "I was wrong." She looked toward Ethan standing quietly near the wall. "The galaxy calls Earth a death world because it is dangerous." She paused for a moment before continuing. "But Earth did not create monsters. It created survivors." The chamber remained silent after her words. Many diplomats slowly nodded in agreement. Even those who feared humanity understood the meaning behind her speech. Humans were not respected because they came from danger. They were respected because they faced danger and protected others anyway. As the delegates prepared to leave the station, Lyris walked toward Ethan one final time. "There is something I still do not understand," she admitted. Ethan looked toward her curiously. "After everything you have done, why work as a bodyguard for a diplomat you never met?" The human thought quietly for a moment. Then he smiled. "Because protecting people is easier than losing them." For the first time since meeting him, Ambassador Lyris smiled back. Far beyond the station windows, the stars continued their endless journey through space. And somewhere among those stars, the galaxy slowly learned an important lesson. Never underestimate a human from Earth, especially one from a death world.